Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural, homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 16, and today I'm here with my friend Taylor talking about math and what it looks like for us natural learning folks. Taylor is a former teacher turned passionate life learner, unschooling mama to 3 kids, and advocate for self-directed education. She also co-hosts the podcast One Free Family with her husband, James. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. The podcast now has 41 5-star reviews, and I am so touched by every single one of them. Amot says, I'm pretty sure I need to have this podcast in my house at all times. I am a better, more grounded, more intentional parent and person when I have Rachel's voice in my ears. I'm excited for the growth and aliveness that I know I will experience as I continue to listen. Thank you so much for these kind words. If you are enjoying Sage Family Podcast too, then please scroll down and click those stars in your podcast app or on iTunes. If you are loving the Sage Family Podcast, then become a part of it through Patreon, where you can support these important conversations, help make this show great, and get rewards doing it. One of my goals for the podcast is actually to bring it on the road with us as we have our big adventures, so it will feel like you guys are right there with us. You can contribute as little as $1 a month, or $5 a month like Mandy, or $20 like Chrissy to help reach that goal. And remember, I'll be doing a special discipline Q&A episode with Tamara Souls from episode 7, where we'll answer questions just from all you lovely patrons, so don't miss out on that. This adventure of the week was a tour of Boehm's Chocolate Factory. I had visions of golden tickets and bubbles, and while I'm disappointed to admit that we did not get to ride in a flying glass elevator, we did get to see how all the delicious chocolate concoctions are made and taste plenty of samples along the way. Now, this chocolate factory tour was pretty special because the company was founded by a man named Julius Boehm, who reminds me of the Dos Equis' most interesting man in the world. He was born and raised in Vienna, Austria, competed in the Olympic Games, utilized his mountaineering skills to escape Hitler's tyranny, fled to Switzerland, and immigrated to the Pacific Northwest, where he opened a candy company as a chocolatier and later became the oldest person to summit Mount Rainier. We got to tour his home, which was like a time capsule of 1940s Austria. As a general rule, if you're combining history and chocolate, I'm eating it all up. Hey West, where can everybody check out photos and videos of this adventure and all the other fun adventures we have? Sage Parenting on Instagram. Okay, now you say it. Go.
Sage Parenting on Instagram.
Okay, good. Now say it with your face right there. Go.
Sage Parenting on Instagram.
No, you can't scream it.
Okay, can I hear that?
Yes, first, let's scoot back a little bit.
Wait, they can hear that.
Yeah, I know. So right now, say Sage Parenting
on Instagram.
Okay, now you say it by yourself. Go.
Sage Parenting on Instagram. Bah.
What does that mean?
Can I hear it?
Yes. Today, my friend Taylor Davis is joining me to talk about math for us natural learning families. I found Taylor when I stumbled upon her One Free Family podcast and heard her and her husband talking about things like discipline and teaching kids about money, all from the perspective of gentle parenting and natural learning, which you know is my jam. Then when she mentioned that she was a math teacher while we were chatting one day, I just knew that I had to have her on and to share a conversation on this topic. So tell us your story, Taylor. Who are you? What are you passionate about? What about your relationships in life fulfill you? And what is your relationship with this topic of math?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for having me. I likewise have been enjoying your podcast so much and recommending it to everybody I know.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's so much fun to kind of, I don't know, hear the different perspectives everybody brings and the different ways we all approach it. So I just love it so much. My name is Taylor. I am an unschooling mom and a former math teacher before. Let's see, I taught math maybe for 5 years through the first year of my oldest son's life, and he's 8 now. So it's been a little while. And I am also a doula and childbirth educator. And as you said, I co-host the podcast One Free Family with my husband, James. And yeah, I am super passionate about the power of self-directed learning and just about throughout that process of learning and family life about kids being honored and respected as autonomous people, because they are.
Yeah, it's a radical idea.
Right? I know. We don't own them. I'm also I'm just really passionate about supporting other families who are somewhere on the path towards, more gentle parenting, whether you're just starting to think about it or you've really kind of, gone into it deeply. I just really want to help other families be well and thrive. So what fulfills me about my relationships in my life, I would say really living in partnership with my own kids and my husband, my partner, fulfills me the most. And then I would also say that living in community with other families who are choosing this path really fulfills me so much. And both in person and online, meeting people like you and other people online who are doing this is so inspiring, as well as the community of families that we've found where we live here in New Hampshire is really inspiring too, to be able to have coffee, with two of my closest friends on a Saturday morning and talk about all things kind of, radical unschooling, self-directed education. And we all know each other's kids and we all see each other's families interact. It's just so awesome.
Yes. So nourishing to the soul.
It really is. And it's such a great place to, to bring even challenges that you're having, because you know that you're bringing challenges to people who are going to support you through those challenges, like through the lens of how we're choosing to be with our kids, instead of saying like, well, maybe if they had some more boundaries, you wouldn't be having this challenge or something like that.
I told you to do timeouts when they were toddlers.
Exactly. So that is just so awesome. And we all just know and love each other's kids so much too. So there's just that really neat connection. And as far as this topic of math, like I said, I used to be a math teacher. I was actually a 5th grade math teacher. And when I was teaching, I was basically required to be teaching from a pretty scripted curriculum. So it was, I was given the teacher's book and the kids had all of their materials, and it was basically written out for me. I mean, not word for word, but really like every 5 minutes, it told me what I needed to do with the kids. So that's kind of my experience with teaching math. And that's kind of my relationship to the topic. Personally, I actually really love math. And I find it just to be really beautiful and interesting. I don't think I would have always said that. I think I did pretty well in school at math, but when I kind of hit the high school years and started feeling, the pressure to take the AP math classes, I took them, but they were really hard for me at that point. And I think it really kind of squashed that love for me for quite a while.
Yeah. Oh, I had an experience. I had experiences like that too. We're going to talk about them later in the episode. We're going to have a little math therapy session where you're going to help me through it.
Yes. I hope I can. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. My husband has a similar experience, and he's very, very mathematically minded, more so even than I am. So he actually really loves math too. So I know that might be a little bit of a unique perspective that I'm bringing coming at it, as a family where both parents are not really scared of math and really love it. But I'm ready and happy to talk about kind of what if that's not your family, what can you do?
I know. Oh my God, I have so much to say. I'm gonna try and hold my tongue.
You got this.
Okay, so let's talk about school math, because you were just talking about that. So how is math taught in schools? And how does that not align with what we know of how children actually learn?
Yeah, so, different schools teach math differently, and so it depends where you are. But in general, I mean, I think first and foremost, almost every school, every traditional school at least, is teaching math as a solitary standalone subject, right? Just like it's teaching many of the other subjects. And to me, that's already a problem because math is just a very, very natural part of our lives, right? We use math all the time. And we use math even when we don't realize we're using it. And kids do the same thing. And just like reading, just like everything else, it's such, it's so interwoven into every day. So pulling it out and making it stand alone in school is just really unnatural if you want to talk about, what natural learning looks like.
Yeah, we're completely decontextualizing it so that it has no meaning or context, or it's not fitting into the web of understanding that kids are developing naturally.
No, it's not at all. And I think when you talk about that web of understanding too, another piece of that is that every child's web of understanding is going to follow, a different path and a different timeline. And so when you have, all of these 9 and 10-year-olds, for example, 29 and 10-year-olds in the same classroom being taught the same thing, there's just no way that it can be uniquely speaking to what their needs are around mathematical understanding at all. And even, I do see schools, and we tried this where I worked, I do see schools trying to, the buzzword is, or at least when I was teaching 8 years ago, was differentiation, right? Schools trying to encourage their teachers to see, okay, when you look at your class of students, there are going to be some students who are kind of like already have grasped the things you're teaching. So you need to give them something more and different. But what that usually ended up meaning in my math classroom where I had, 20 kids and just me, was like the kids who were kind of beyond it were just, I tried to give them interesting materials, but they were basically just sitting at a table in the back doing their own thing because I was just one person with all of these kids. And I had a lot of kids who weren't understanding what I was teaching, and they were the ones who I, had the pressure to try to, quote, catch them up. So it's just really, really hard to meet kids where they're at, I think is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's one of the greatest strengths of like homeschooling and natural learning in particular, is that you can meet your child right where they're at, and they get to have the time to develop on their own timeline without any pathology or pressure around that. And with math, that's even more so essential. And I think a lot of research supports that certain parts to the brain really click on at different times for different kids. And when you try and force it before they're ready, it just causes a lot of problems and is very inefficient use of of everyone's time and effort.
Oh my gosh, I know. I'm probably going to talk about that more later, but I totally agree with you. That's the other piece or one of the other pieces is it's just a huge waste of time for kids who just aren't ready. I mean, really for both sets of kids, right? Like kids who just aren't ready, they're just not going to get it until they're ready. And then the kids who have already grasped it 2 years ago, whatever the thing is that's trying to be taught, it's a huge waste of their time too, right? Like they're already there and they could be doing something more meaningful to them. So I think that transitions nicely into the idea too, when you think about how math is taught in school and what we really know about how kids learn, right? We know that kids learn through play, and we know that they learn when they are really passionate about the thing they're learning, right? Yes. So, I mean, I can't tell you, I don't know if I actually did a study on what percentage of the kids in my math class were actually super passionate about what we were doing. It wasn't very many of them. And I think that partly could be because it was being taught, again, out of context as this standalone subject. And they were already in 5th grade. So perhaps their excitement about math and their genuine curiosity about numbers and patterns and this beautiful language of math, like that had already kind of been squashed for a lot of them. But we know that when people are intrinsically motivated to learn, that's when the learning happens. And I mean, it's just like what you talked about on your episode on reading. When people are ready and motivated, it clicks. And it also, for the most part, happens so seamlessly. And when you talk about wasting time, so much faster.
Yes.
not that fast matters, but I do think wasting kids' time really matters.
Yeah, it does. I have this quote in my book that says, what math students are doing in school is just memorization, plug and chug, not understanding. They can perform computations, yet they can't interpret or apply the numbers and concepts. And that was a quote from a college math professor, which absolutely reflected my experience in math class. Even when I did very well in math classes, it was very much just plug and chug. Like I had a good memory, basically, is what it was.
Right.
So if you tell me do this, this, and this, I could replicate that 500 times. But if I was in the grocery store and somebody, I needed a fraction of this and a fraction of that, I would have had no clue, no idea what to do. I had no connection between that rote memorization, plug and chug thing that I'm doing and what that actually had to do with the real world.
Right, because like you said, you were never given the chance to let that web of learning and understanding develop naturally for yourself,
Yes.
right? So you were taught these formulas and how to plug the numbers in, but for all you knew, that had nothing to do with a fraction of something at a store, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was this nebulous blob of instructions just floating around freely. It wasn't connected to anything, which is a really important part. It's an essential part of having information actually be usable.
Right. And for you and so many other people who are taught math that way, the only reason that many of these kids see that they're learning these things is to learn them for school and take the test, whatever the next test is, right?
Yep.
So when you don't see the connection to real life and how it really does seamlessly flow in and out of everyday life, you're not going to, be passionate or excited about it, but you're also not going to actually have a good understanding of it in a way that's going to be useful to you.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about probably the biggest byproduct of the schooled math approach, which is math anxiety or phobia.
Yes.
I have another quote, just from the Sage Homeschooling book. The primary export of math education is math anxiety or phobia. Most students get to college so damaged that one university math professor described it as being a -5 on the number line of mathematical understanding, whereas they would be at 0 and farther ahead if they were actively taught nothing. And I will say that school totally taught me that I was quote unquote bad at math. And it turns out I'm great with numbers. I run my own business. I run my own household. I have a graduate degree. Part of that was research statistics. And when I was ready to learn it and I had an interest and a need to learn it, there was context for it and it made perfect sense to me. And I know I'm in good company. So, having launched into adulthood with this piece to my identity, I had to do a lot of deschooling and processing of that to overcome it. So why do you think that is that so many of us have this problem? Help me dig around underneath it.
Yeah. I'm not, I don't know that I have the exact answer, but I have some thoughts. And one of them flows really nicely from what you were just talking about, so when you think about how math is taught in schools, and then when you also just think about school in general, I think there's a really, really big aspect of competition in schools, right? Mm-hmm. So you're being evaluated all the time and you're all talking with each other about what grades you got. And depending, some teachers don't do this, but there will be teachers who will even announce in front of the class, who got the best grades on the test. And I'm hoping that's less common these days, but so there's this aspect of competition, and it's competition that's not, I'm okay with competition if kids are choosing it for themselves for something, mm-hmm. but this is, clearly not chosen. And so I think when you are in school, if you're being taught before you're ready to learn a certain concept and it's feeling hard for you, but you're continuously drilled on it and continuously tested on it and continuously told, you're not measuring up to your peers on this, we need to do something about it, right? There's so much focus on it. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is you're also just feeling incredibly anxious and tense, I can imagine, already about math, which doesn't help you learn math, right? It's like this endless cycle. You walk into that classroom and your whole body tenses up and you feel scared and anxious. So even if maybe you did hit a point where you were ready to learn, it might be really hard because just a basic need of feeling safe is not being met. And it's very hard to learn in that kind of environment. So I don't know. I think that's a little a part of it. I also think it's interesting to read about what Peter Gray says about math anxiety, and I'm probably going to mention him a couple times because
Me too.
I love him.
Ditto.
I really just love his work so much. And so I kind of, looked around to see what he has said about math because I was interested. And one thing that he talks about is kind of this theory he has that American culture kind of places math up on this pedestal and equates math ability to intelligence. And so all of us in this culture are kind of agreeing that, being intelligent, one of the things that plays into that is having, good math skills and a good mathematical understanding.
Yeah.
Which can make it feel really crucial to be good at math, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not, then you're perhaps not intelligent. And that's a really scary message, I think, for kids to be getting. And also, I don't think it's true. And Peter Gray doesn't think it's true either. I don't think it's true that being, naturally mathematically inclined makes you more intelligent. You think about all of the different ways that people choose to spend their lives. There's plenty of super intelligent people out in our society, contributing in really awesome ways that barely involve math at all, right?
Yeah.
So math is great and I love it. And I think if people are interested in it and need to pursue it for a career or want to, then that's really great. But I also think that it doesn't need to be something that everybody masters at a high level. But the idea that we need to do that, I think, contributes to this anxiety. It makes parents anxious. So then the parents' anxiety flows into the kids if the kids are, quote, falling behind and so on.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's so much. And then it just becomes a narrative for that kid. Like, I'm bad at math.
Bingo.
And I mean, this is probably a whole additional conversation, but, we talk a lot in self-directed learning about what if we instead just focused on kids' strengths, right? And helped them really dive into the things that they were passionate about and that were going well for them. Yeah, that's an entire other topic. But
so if I were a student in your classroom, I'd be that student like shifting with like her hand kind of like going up in the air because I'm like so excited about all these different things that you've said. So first, like multiple intelligences. I am going to be recording a whole episode on neurodiversity with Debbie from Tilt Parenting. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but I am definitely going to talk about. I'm so excited
for that. That's awesome.
Yes, I'm definitely going to talk about multiple intelligences and viewing children through a strength-based lens, which I am super passionate about and do a lot of work in coaching with parents around. I think with the math anxiety and phobia, what that is shame. So like shame shows up to the party in lots of different outfits. And that's one of the outfits that shame wears is math anxiety and phobia for so many of us who learned math, quote unquote were taught math, I should say,
right.
Through the schooled track. That is one of the outfits that shame wears. It certainly was for me. I think, when you look at the work of people like Carol Dweck and you have like the effort versus the inherent qualities, like the mindset research that she has. And for those of you who aren't familiar, basically she says if you attribute kids' success to inherent qualities, then the outcomes go down. And if you attribute them to things like effort, then the outcomes go up. But when we're talking about like this math shame piece, like we're missing some variables in that. You're missing like time and you're missing context because maybe like you are trying your absolute hardest and you're still not getting the result that you want. Like, so then it either has to go into, well, it must be inherent qualities, or we can look at like these other pieces that I think are missing from the conversation. Like maybe you're not ready to understand this yet. And maybe this is not the right context for you to understand it. Maybe sitting in a classroom being lectured to or filling out worksheets is not the right context for you to learn it. So I think
it's not your learning style.
Yeah, we have to like expand the lens a little bit to be able to see to view our kids through that strength-based lens, and then B, also to be able to help our kids better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's huge. The idea of multiple intelligences and learning styles. When you're teaching, like I said, when you're teaching a class of 20 kids, all 20 of those kids is being taught in exactly the same way. And even if you kind of try to hit on a few different learning styles throughout the course of your lesson, it's still not going to be meeting those kids, each one of those unique kids where they're at in any way. And again, like you said, it's also going to just be wildly out of context. So
yeah, well, and like you were saying in your class, you split the kids into the groups, and even that, like, shame shows up to that because the kids know, like, they know which group they're in.
Yeah, and we mostly would just, where I was, we would mostly just take the few kids who were kind of just way beyond where we were and give them some, differentiation or enrichment or whatever you want to call it. And the rest we would kind of try to keep together. And that's also tricky too, because actually if you do have to meet the goal of getting these kids all to the same place, being able to teach separate groups in different ways, kind of based on where they are, is helpful, but it does have the result, like you said, of creating this level of shame and embarrassment because, yes, the kids absolutely by 10 years old, they know, like, oh, I'm in the group that, like, doesn't really get it. And
yeah, well, and that
really
research shows, the research on that shows that if you switch the groups and tell the kids and teachers you are in the remedial group and you are in the advanced group, like the kids who actually scored opposite, by the end of their year, their test scores will be more in line with the group that you assigned them, quote unquote. Like,
that is so fascinating.
It's so powerful, like you were saying, that narrative, like the narrative that you have about who you are and where you belong and what you're capable of and what the expectations are on you. And I just want us to add in those extra pieces of, like, learning style and context and time with the conversation around, like, effort and then labels.
It's so true. There's so much there. So yeah, I'm really glad you added those things in.
Well, I'm gonna get, like, totally vulnerable here and share that when I was in 7th grade, I took pre-algebra and I was put in, like, Kumon, which was boring and awful for me, and had a tutor and tried my absolute hardest. But the way it was being taught, I just couldn't process it, or my brain wasn't ready to. Or, like, the negativity spiral and pressure was too much. And I got a C. And I was grounded for the entire summer, and I never tried again. Like, school was always very easy for me, and at the end of middle school I was placed, like, on the advanced track for high school, and I said no. I changed all the AP and honors classes, and I vowed to never do any work outside of the classroom where I had to be. So I just sat in the back of the room and did all the assignments while the teachers talked and skated through, not ever turning my brain on, and got great grades because it was all super easy, but I learned absolutely nothing. And that was one of those, like, profound moments for me, that not until I had chosen to go to a college and, like, found something to study that I was passionate about, like, it wasn't until then was I able to heal that scenario that happened back when I was in 7th grade.
Wow, that's a really just intense story, and just such a and I'm sorry that was your experience. My gosh, like, that's such an illustration of the risk we run by educating kids this way. Like, the risk we run to just completely, like, not only crushing their love of learning, but really crushing their spirits too.
Yeah. So tell us about, like, natural numeracy development and how we can support it in our kids without that big shame piece.
Yeah, so I really see natural numeracy development so much in the same way that I see language development and reading development and writing development, which is, if your listeners have listened to your episode on reading, it's right in line with that. And we've been saying it, since we first started talking. The best way to support it is to stop teaching it if kids aren't interested or ready. So, like, I think that's the first step, is to, and I know that's easier said than done, right? If you haven't, and I'm going to talk a little more later about, deschooling ourselves around what we believe math is, and about, because, you hear a lot of times, I think math and reading and writing are the things that people who are trying to support a self-directed approach for their kids really get hung up on, right?
The biggest fears.
Yes, so some of the really, really greatest fears. So I think first of all, the best way we can support it is by, being really careful not to be teaching it, especially out of context to kids who aren't yet interested or aren't ready. I would also say, like, when we start noticing kids kind of tuning into mathematical ideas and concepts, that just like we do with everything else, if we can follow their lead and play with them around it, that is how natural numeracy develops. So if we can like really resist the temptation to start teaching, memorization of math facts and arithmetic with no reasoning behind it, because that actually, I think, directly interferes with natural numeracy development.
Yeah.
Like you said, like that plug and chug and the drill and kill, that's not, our kids are not going to, I would have fifth graders in my class who had all of the multiplication tables, like through the 12s, memorized, but they actually didn't really understand the relative size of the numbers in comparison to one another. And they couldn't actually, right? Like they couldn't actually talk about, what is 10 times 9? Oh, that's actually like 10 groups of 9.
Right.
And it's just, there was none of that kind of really more sophisticated thinking about it that even young kids can have if they're given the space to develop it.
Yes.
So I don't know. I had sent this article to you. Can I say a little bit about this study that was done in New Hampshire? Because I think it's this is just so fascinating. And I won't say too much because people can just go read the article. But again, it's Peter Gray. And he wrote this article. Somebody pointed him in the direction of a study that was done in 1929. And this essentially, the superintendent of schools in Manchester, New Hampshire, did an experiment in which he had certain schools in his district completely drop math until sixth grade. So he said, don't do math with your students. And instead, he asked them to fill it with I forget what he called it, but basically having conversations about real life things, basically just like, how was your weekend? What's your favorite movie? Things like that. So he did this, and those students, I guess they started in kindergarten. By the time when they got to sixth grade, he had a grad student from Boston University come and evaluate the experimental students on their math skills, as well as like the control classes where they just kept teaching math the way it had always been done. And basically what they found is that by the end of sixth grade, both groups did equally as well on basic arithmetic. And then the experimental class, the kids who had done no math until that year, surpassed their peers in math problems that required problem solving and creative thinking and that like related to real life.
Yeah, so kids receiving no math instruction before sixth grade scored higher on standardized math exams, particularly story problems, at the end of sixth grade than their peers who received the K through 6 math instruction.
Yeah, I feel like, why don't we all know about this study and why is nobody doing anything about it? Like, it's just incredible to me. The idea is that all of that arithmetic and drill in those early years, like you said before, is a huge waste of time. Yeah. And not only is it a waste of time, but it really dulls down kids' natural problem-solving tendencies and curbs that like curious, creative thinking that kids come into the world with. So it's just fascinating to me.
Yes. So how do we support the natural math? Like, let your kids live their lives. And
let's start with let your kids live their lives. I think also I think that will come through a lot when I talk a little bit about like how it looks in our house. And I know we're just one family, but I think there's some good kind of glimpses at how we support natural math learning as a self-directed family. I think though, again, being really careful to not in front of and with our kids buy into our culture's view of math as this be all end all of intelligence, right?
Yes.
Because that just sets it up on this really scary, anxiety ridden pedestal.
Yeah.
And so if we can be careful to avoid saying things to our kids like, I'm bad at math. Math was always scary to me. And just being really careful not to like give them that burden that we've had to carry and our baggage around math. Because quite likely if they're still little and even if they're not, if they've been kind of self-directed, they don't have that baggage. And so if we can try to come to it with a beginner's mind and not place that baggage on them, I think that will really help.
Role modeling.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the other piece is that, like you said, living your life. If you're living life in the world, natural numeracy development will happen if we don't get in the way. And we can support it. It doesn't mean we have to pretend math doesn't exist and tiptoe around it, because math is really fun and really beautiful, just like
Yep.
reading and language and writing. But developing number sense is a real result of natural math learning. So instead of memorizing, kids are actually getting a full understanding of the relative size and numbers. So there's opportunities every day. From the time that kids are 2, they begin kind of counting things that they see, or just saying the numbers that maybe they hear their siblings or their parents saying. They begin grouping things and noticing patterns. And through this play, they really gain a natural sense of amounts and how numbers relate to one another, and why numbers, like how numbers flow in and out of our daily life every day, right? They just become another part of life, just like talking and walking.
Exactly.
So there's so many things that you can do. You can point out amounts of things. You can count for fun with your kids. I think, again, like I said, when I talk about how it looks in our family, you'll get a really good idea, kind of. And also another link that I sent you from Peter Gray, at the end of the article, there's tons of little anecdotes from different types of homeschooling families that talk about how their kids kind of naturally develop numeracy and math skills. So those are really interesting too.
Yeah, well, so let's help paint a picture, because you and I are both sort of in this current right now. My kids, while I'm recording this, are in the front yard. We're doing like landscaping in the front, and we've chainsawed down a whole bunch of shrubs, and we have a chipper shredder, and the trees and sticks and whatnot can't have greater than a 3-inch diameter. So the kids are like sorting them by piles right now, so that Josh
awesome.
can throw them into the chipper shredder. Like there are 2 different places to put things in, and the different diameters go in the different places. So they're kind of helping him sort those out right now. So that's just like a super quick example of literally what is happening while I am recording this. But what does it look like in your family?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways that math kind of flows in and out of our lives every day. And I guess I didn't say this at the beginning, but for a little bit of a better picture of my family, we have 3 kids, and our oldest, Oliver, is 8, and our middle, Ezra, is 6. They both just turned 6 and 8. And then the littlest, August, is about 2.5. So that's kind of where we're coming from, just in, as you listen to what we're up to. So in our family, as I said before, my husband and I didn't have to do too much deschooling around math for ourselves. So maybe that helped a little bit. But a lot of the math we do is what Peter Gray calls playful math. And he defines this just as math that's done for no other purpose than the sheer fun and beauty of it. So and it's not because we sit down and say, most of the time, it's not because my husband or I sits down with them and says, like, let's play with math. It's just because they actually are just playing, right? And we're just joining in. So one example is, I don't know when this started, but ever since our oldest was maybe 3 or 4, he would tell us, like, ask me math questions. I want to try, like what's 3 plus 3? Like, he would just want to do it. So we've been doing that in the car forever. And sometimes, like, we'll make up little word problems for each other. Sometimes it'll just be simple, like, arithmetic, but we just have fun with it. And when people are tired of it, we stop, right?
And the siblings do it with each other, too. They do in my family. I'm sure they do in your family, too.
Yes, they do so much. That's awesome. Yeah. So just recently, actually, my 6-year-old was sitting outside with me and my mother-in-law, so his grandma, and he said, Mommy, ask me what's 2 plus 2. So I did. And he said, okay, it's 4. And then he just took it from there. He said, what's 4 plus 4? 8. What's 8 plus 8? 16. And he went on into like hundreds and hundreds, just doubling these numbers.
That's amazing.
To the point where, like, me and my mother-in-law were like, we were having to think really hard too to get to the answer. And that was a great moment to practice not demonstrating math anxiety, right?
Yes.
We did our best. And then he kind of got tired of it, but it was so funny because he went back out inside and I'm still out there talking to her. And like 10 minutes later, I hear the window fly open and he yells out the window, what? And he, like, whatever the number he was on, 800 and something plus 800 and something. And then he just solved it, like, from inside the house. It was just so cute. But that's just a great example of kind of playful math, how it just kind of,
it was so cute.
Like he went for it, then he took a break, but he was still kind of thinking about it. And it stayed fun for him because he could engage with it to the point that he wanted to, and then he could stop. So I think that's really, really important and helpful. I have to sometimes stop myself too, to like, sometimes I want to explain more or like throw in another challenge. And like, if I actually stop and think, I can tell they don't want that. And so I have to pull it back.
Right.
So that's one way. Another, obviously with the 2-year-old, we're just seeing him now 2.5 all of the time, kind of trying to count things. And he's not always counting things right. But it's the idea of like, oh, there's all these dots on this page in my book I'm reading, and I'm just kind of playing around with these numbers and counting them. So just kind of joining them in that fun and seeing that happen is really cool.
Yes, I remember when my youngest was around that age, he used to walk around the room and he would count, quote unquote, the people. He'd go 1, 2, 1, 2, like count just for, because those were the only numbers that he knew at the time, and he would just but he was counting the people. He was like playing with the numbers, and he understood there was some sort of sequencing. He just didn't quite have the words to label it right.
That's exactly it. I love that example because, again, before the numbers themselves even matter very much, how awesome is it that he was developing the idea of like, you can count things and you can count in the same order every time, and that can give you information about how much there is. Like all of those huge ideas about why we even use this thing called math. Like he was developing that when he was 2, right?
Yes.
That's so awesome. We also, a big way in our family, and so I was going to say earlier, talking about natural numeracy development, I have to say that video games are like, my 2 older kids love video games, and I think that they have learned so much math from these video games.
Yeah.
And it's like really been, I don't know if you've seen the same thing. Like I know you've mentioned your kids like Minecraft.
Yeah.
But it's just been incredible to watch them do these, and it's all different types of games. So, games from like apps that they'll play on an iPad all the way to like my kids even play Fortnite, and they'll be assessing like, do they have the number of resources that they need and how many more do they need to get? And just all of those like, and they're doing these calculations really fast now too, because a lot of the games are fast paced. So, I definitely am somebody who is still, I'm getting there, but I'm still deschooling around, into some level around screens. But I have to say, they play video games freely, really as much as they want to. And I think that's where so much of their math has come. And even things like economic decision making, should I spend this amount of money that I have in this game on this resource, or should I wait till I get more for this? Like, what would be the cost benefit of that? It's really incredible to watch.
Yes, I so agree that like video games and technology are really upping the ante with literacy and with numeracy.
That too. Literacy as well. I swear my 8-year-old learned how to read from communicating online with his friends and reading things in his games too. It's just amazing. And so again, like I think if we can try to deschool ourselves and pull back some, really dig into where that fear is coming from. And for me, the best way to do that has just been sitting down and either playing with my kids or watching them. And, when it's not annoying to them, asking questions about what's going on. Because then you see everything that's happening. And when we're talking about math, you see all this math that they're doing. So definitely in our family, numeracy and math development has come as a byproduct of a lot of video gaming. Other things, just more general things in our house is just, we try to be conscious of keeping their learning environment. You talk about this too, just inspiring and full of ways for them to engage with different things that might be interesting. So if you have musical instruments and music to read in your environment, there's math in that. If you have out, at different times, we don't have too much out at one time, but if you have scales or balances, rulers, measuring tape, calculators, blocks, money for playing store, if the kitchen is accessible and you can support them to cook, like all of these things are different things that my kids have done at different times that have supported numeracy development and math. So
yes to all that. Hopefully everybody was listening to that. Time to wake up if you weren't. Yes, all those things she just listed, like that. Those were all a huge part.
Slow-mo that list for you.
Those were all a huge part for my kids in playing with math.
They're such a big part. Cooking is huge. Just measuring and all of that is a huge thing that especially my oldest really enjoys doing. So that's another way that we learn math. We also really like to, just because my husband and I, again, we're like kind of math nerds, but we like to talk to our kids about, like when we play those little games, like what's, 17 times 3 or whatever. We always try to talk about like, oh, how did you figure that out? And my kid will say what they did. And then the other kid will say what they did. And sometimes they used the same strategy and sometimes they used a different strategy. But being able to talk about like, oh, 17 times 3. Okay, I did 10 times 3 and 7 times 3 in my head. And I knew I could do those in my head. So then I added them together, just like kind of having lighthearted conversation. Product. Yeah, exactly. That's really, I think, helped to develop some sort of sense of, again, like actual understanding of the size of numbers and why that strategy would work. I don't think that's crucial if that's like not your thing, but that's just kind of how it looks in our house.
Yeah. Well, and it's highlighting that like the answer is less important than figuring out how to get wherever you need to be.
Exactly. And then we talk about, if somebody couldn't figure one out, I'll share like, oh, this is the strategy I used. And also like, here's some other ways. Something we did even more when they were smaller is, I don't think in that list I mentioned also just other manipulatives in your space that can be counted, right? And that can be used. So for super little kids, if they're interested in adding, but just keeping it all in their brain or on paper isn't making sense, you can just have a whole basket of rocks and then they can say,
God,
like,
I was just going to say rocks, rocks, rocks. Oh my God, all the rocks.
Yeah,
we go down to the beach.
Stuff even.
Yes, and my kids collect all the rocks. And when we hike in the woods, they collect all the sticks. And there is so much counting and sorting and math that happens when those get brought back home.
Yes, and or like, so many different things can be used as manipulatives to support, like you said, to support math. Like even Halloween candy, like that's something that's always sorted and counted and all of that. So that's kind of fun. And then one other example that I thought would be fun to share because it literally happened earlier this week and it was so cool. We had a 16-year-old friend visiting from Virginia. My husband and I have known her since she was 1, and she comes and stays with us for a week every summer. And she's so awesome, and my kids love her so much. And she was, we were just all sitting in the living room, and she mentioned, I think, that she took algebra in school last year. She goes to school. And my 6-year-old said, what's algebra? And so she gave a basic example, like, 3 plus X equals 5 or something. And something about that for him, just like, he was so fascinated. And so the next morning we spent he asked to do more of that. And we just spent 30 minutes just like solving for X because he was excited.
Oh,
so I think just also, I think that is so beautiful that when our kids are in an environment where they can be self-directed and they can choose when to engage with something, and we won't always be right there to support it because we can't, but when we are, it's awesome to just be right there and being able to just play with them. So
yeah, then that's like part of our role is this like exposure piece. Like on the one end we have like meeting them with the materials and experiences, and then on the other end it's like exposing them to a wide variety of ideas and cultures and languages and concepts and ideas, and that can be done in a way that's not coercive or forceful or shame-inducing.
I think you're so right. I think it's the idea that as kids who are living their lives outside of school, they are living in the real world. So they're constantly being exposed to different people and different ideas, like you said. And because math is just linked into everyday life, they're going to randomly have these encounters with different ideas, and then they get to choose if they want to take it any further. So
yes, exactly.
And a couple other, I was talking a bit about playful math, but we also moved into a little bit about, what Peter Gray calls instrumental math, which would be math that's useful for life. So we've kind of talked about like cooking, that's kind of more instrumental math because you're doing math because it's useful for something you want to accomplish, right? So that's huge too, just I think for us to remember that those opportunities come up all the time. So, I think about budgeting and like the family budget, or if the kids have money or if they want to earn money, there's tons of math that's happening there, right?
Yes.
Making decisions, right, about how to spend their money and helping them through that process. What kid isn't going to be self-motivated to figure that out if there's something they really want to buy. So that's another cool way.
Absolutely. Money is a big motivator for sure. I know, like when because we were renovating our house, and so the kids were doing, oh my God, all the measurement, like area and length and angles.
Awesome. I love that.
For everything. I mean, building a stair rail, like that has an unbelievable amount of math. I'm just gonna say, if you want like a good family math project, try to build a stair railing like at the angle.
That's
and
awesome.
It was like a fun way for us all to work on chew on these things together. And then like volume and fractions while you're cooking, and positive and negative numbers and percentages and tables, all while doing some of my business accounting. Like they often will help me with my business accounting. And we really give them a seat at the table when we have conversations around our family finances, because we decide, each season, like what are our priorities going to be? And, we can't do all of the things. So we have to what are our values? And then what things do we want to focus on in each season? And, I have the bucket system class where we talk more about that, but I want to say like that money plays a role in that too. And so they are kind of involved in all of that. And that's a lot of accounting. That's a lot of math. So, I mean, if they grow up understanding math, they can easily learn to label it later whenever they have a need or desire. But I want them to like be friends with math and like have a good relationship with math.
Oh, I love that. I love that phrase, be friends with math. That's so great. And I think like what you're saying is so awesome when you think about like your family building that staircase and your family budget. Again, when you're living life this way, and your kids do have a seat at the table, and your kids are a part of family decisions, and just they're also a part of everyday family life, right?
Yeah.
There's no escaping the uses that we have for math. And so when they're living life with us and they're invited to join that, they are going to have so many opportunities to engage with math in so many really like interesting and meaningful ways, right? Like building a staircase for your house, that's so different than getting assigned a project in which they have to say how they would build a staircase.
Totally.
With like no connection to actual real life. Like that was your house. You guys needed that staircase.
Yes, like sitting in a classroom, filling out a worksheet, trying to map out like a staircase. Like they would have had, like there would have been like blank stares on their faces. But when you're standing like on this ledge and you need a way to like get from the door to the main level of the house.
Right.
We're going to all work together and figure this out and make lots of mistakes along the way and make lots of Home Depot runs to get new pieces of wood. And we will figure it out.
It's so beautiful when it happens that way. And I also love what you said about they can have like a label for what that is later. They don't even have to, it doesn't even matter if they know they're quote doing math or not. They're just developing skills to live their lives. And of course, as time goes on, they'll realize like, oh, that was math, and that's fine.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's talk about gaps, because that's kind of what we were talking about with the fear piece. And I have a whole section in the Sage Homeschooling book about fear of gaps, because it was an initial fear of mine. And I could probably do an entire episode on this topic alone, but I'll just say that A, school has gaps. B, teaching is not the same as learning. C, we all have gaps based on our strengths and interests. We fill in gaps as we have a need or desire. And the breadth of knowledge your children are acquiring naturally is surprisingly robust. So when it comes to math, like we were talking about Peter Gray, in his book, he talks about how a large group of kids aged 9 to 12, they had received no compulsory math instruction and asked to be taught math, and it took 20 hours to learn all 6 years worth.
I love that.
20 hours. So instead of spending your kid's entire childhood like being tortured and frustrated and picking up that shame piece, like let's just not. And then when they get to a point, if you say, oh, hey, so you want to take this class or do this program, and to do that you have to understand these math concepts. So are you do you want to learn those math concepts? Sure. Like even if they're doing all 6 years worth, it's probably going to take about 20 hours.
I am so on board with that. And I think so many families have seen this happen. Even families who have, who've been self-directed education families, and then, they have a kid who wants to go to college. And because I think that some people fear, like, well, what if they need to take a placement exam for college and there's math? These kids just, if they are motivated enough to go to college, then they will be motivated enough to learn the math they need to take the test.
Exactly.
And I think families see this.
Yeah, the worst case scenario in my mind is that, like, my kid takes a remedial math class at the local community college as a teenager before starting at Harvard. Like, that's I'm totally good with that. And we do a lot of like apps and games and stuff. So I kind of have a general idea that they're all about, give or take. Like, they have, because we're not learning in that linear way or off of somebody else's charts about what they should learn when. It's not precise and exact across the board, but they're all basically where they would need to be. But even if they just stuck their fingers in their ears and closed their eyes and said, la, 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 like, they could still, at like 14 at most community colleges, you can start taking lower level classes. Yeah. Like, okay, great. You want to go to Harvard? Like, you're going to have to take the SAT, and in order to get a good grade on the SAT and to do your best, like, you're going to have to be really familiar with the actual labels for all this math that you've been playing with. And so here's a class where you can learn all of that.
Yeah, and that's so true. I think sometimes parents fear when we talk about, quote, gaps. I think parents sometimes fear also that there's this prime window for learning certain things. So you see this talked about with foreign languages and with reading and with math. But really, when you observe self-directed learners, you realize that this, at least I have, that this really isn't true. The real prime window is actually readiness and motivation. So I think if we think like, oh, this prime window to like start on this arithmetic must start when they're 6. But if this 6-year-old could care less and their brain isn't ready, then we're actually that's not the prime window, and we're just wasting their time again. So I think like we take this huge risk by forcing math in school before kids are ready. And I think we kind of kill any love that they could have had for it. And I really believe that if we simply waited until life presented kids with a reason, those who needed the math would learn it, and they would learn it faster. They'd learn it with more joy, and they would learn it to a point where they actually understood it. It wasn't, it wouldn't be like, let me just memorize these facts, spit them out on the test, and then it's gone from my brain. Because that's what a lot of math was for me in school.
Yes. Well, and I think we also have to keep in mind, too, when we're talking about these fears, that so many parents, I mean, when you're saying there's like this special window, they're imagining, like, okay, mainstream kids are in a classroom all day long. In the morning, they're just getting ready for school. Then they're at school all day. Then it's extracurriculars and getting ready for bed and homework and going to bed. So there's not much like living life in the real world. So they're imagining, so if they're sitting in a classroom all day and not being taught any math, like, then they won't be exposed to any math. But kids, when you're living life in the real world full time, it is impossible to not be exposed to math all of the time. So when you're talking about those sensitive windows, what that looks like from my perspective as a parent living this lifestyle is that things resonate with my kids at very important times. But the math is always there. It's always around them. The other day, one of my kids, Bailey, who's 10, was reading this chapter book and wanted to know what percentage of the book he had made it through, and like was figuring that out based on how many pages there were. And it's like, we've always, you tip 20%, and you like, these things have always been been around him all the time. But like in that moment, percentages just resonated with him, and then he started like doing percentages for all the things. Like it was
and it was fun and playful for him because he's always been given this space to engage with it on his own terms, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. That's so awesome. And I think we also have to remember that because, when our kids are living in the real world, like you said, every day with us, they're going to be exposed to so much math, and they may not say a single word about whatever mathy thing they came across that day, but it doesn't mean that it didn't like take a little, take root in their brain. And that when we talk about like webs of understanding, that they won't see something else again in 3 months and it will connect to this thing that they never even mentioned, but they heard. And it's incredible. Like I see this every day with my kids. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know you heard that. And that was 6 months ago. Like, seriously?
That is exactly how learning works. There's so much, even if they're not saying anything or writing anything down, if you are exposing them to, basically, if you're giving them access to your real, again, with that like mainstream parenting, it's usually like you kid lock all the cupboards and you don't talk about money in front of your kids. And anytime you're having conversations as a couple, it's out on a date night and the kids aren't around. But if you're living this gentle parenting, family integrated lifestyle, your kids are a part of all of this. My husband and I were having this in-depth conversation about capital gains tax. And I think that was one of the things that spurred that whole percentage, sort of lit that fire in my kid. And we were like researching it a little bit, and I was watching something about it, and we were discussing it just over the course of like several months, and like because my kids are a part of all of these things with us, like they get access and experience and exposure to so much all the time.
Yeah, it's so true. And yeah, I don't know, even when they don't seem to be joining every conversation, they're, like you said, they're still picking it up and they're still hearing it. And like you said, like that idea of percentages when you were talking about the tax played into him wanting to just for fun figure out what percentage of his book he had read. That's so cool. That makes me think another thing that some math comes into play for us a lot is just with time, because we're always talking about, where are we going today? And, what time are we going to leave? And when we get there, how long does everybody think they're going to want to stay? And of course, also the never ending question in the car of like, how long until we get there? So we've gotten to the point where we're like, okay, we're going to get there around this time. So now that you know that, like, you can most likely like look at the clock. And now both of the older ones can look at the clock and say like, oh, that means we're 18 minutes away, so that we don't have to answer that question all the time.
Yes. Like we were hiking the other day and it was like, well, how long is the hike? It's 1.2 miles. Well, but you also have to factor in, one of them is saying like, well, but you have to factor in the return trip. So double it, and then one of them's like, well, what's the angle of the incline? Cause we are going uphill all the way there. How does that factor into the effort that's being output to get up this hill? And Wes, actually, we had checked out some book at the library and it had talked about simple machines. And he was like, a ramp is a simple machine. And we're, and then in these parts where they use the rocks and the tree roots, those are steps. And like these things just randomly, they come up when you're just living. And that's just like on a little hike, that's like, it's not something that I laid out a timetabled curriculum for and spent months planning. Like we were like, hey, let's go with friends on this hike. And all of this math is all around them.
Right. All the time. And they can just kind of engage with it in the way that feels fun for them. And that's when they're going to learn the most, right? When it's fun and meaningful.
Exactly. Oh, and the temperature of the water, because it was mighty cold. Running right off Mount Rainier. It was beautiful, crystal clear, but mighty cold.
So pretty.
Okay, so let's move into our Q&A. I posted in my Sage Parenting Tribe on Facebook that we were going to chat about math today and asked if anyone had any questions about it. Noelle says, I am not very confident in my math skills. Just recently, the girls watched me struggle to adjust a circle skirt pattern while sewing pi and radius and all that, and I finally gave up and asked for help when trying to determine how much dirt to buy for our round garden stock tanks. I want to help my people have enough understanding and confidence to find the answers when they need them. Part of me wonders if that means I just brush up on my own math so I'm more confident. So what say you?
Yeah, so I thought about this question and I was like, I feel like just this question in itself is a really beautiful illustration of a parent naturally modeling math in their everyday life, first of all. So I know I'm not answering the question yet, but just the idea of like Noelle was just by living her life and doing things that were interesting, was using math, right? Sewing and pi and radius for this circle skirt and these, I think the volume of these tanks for dirt. Like she was modeling for our kids everyday uses of math, also, it appears to me, based on how the question was worded, that she also modeled what to do when you can't figure it out, which was ask for help.
Yes.
And I think that's actually really awesome. And it seems so simple, but what an incredible skill and an important thing to be able to do throughout your life, to ask for help when you get stuck. Like, I feel like school teaches us that that's a bad
cheating.
thing. Right, it's cheating. Don't work together. Don't talk to your neighbor. Do your own work.
Don't look it up in the book.
That is not how the world works. Right. And I just feel like for her kids to see her just ask for help is actually a really beautiful lesson in itself when you talk about role modeling, right? I also just think it's okay and actually important for our kids to see us struggle with things and to see that we don't know everything. Because if we appear to know it all, what are our kids going to think when they realize they don't know everything, or when they realize that not everything comes easily to them? Yes. They're going to be like, wait a minute, but it was always so easy for mom and dad. They know everything. What's wrong with me?
The glorious learning value of being perfectly imperfect.
Yes. So I think there's so much, I hope that part of my response actually helps to put her at ease a little bit, just in the sense of like, everything that she's doing is already so awesome. Like, she's modeling the use of math in her life. She's modeling what to do when she gets stuck. And the truth is that with the way technology is today, so many answers and so much support can be found pretty easily.
Yeah.
So we don't need to hold all of this information in our heads anymore. Like, we really don't need to. We can free that space up for other things. So I don't know. I don't really think that she has to brush up on her math. I would say unless that is feeling exciting and fun. Like, if it's coming from a place of fear, I would always question that, because I don't think fear is the best motivator.
Yes.
And I promise I know that from experience.
Yes.
But I think if one of those two problems, the sewing thing or the tomato thing, like, as she looked into it, if that felt interesting and exciting, then brushing up on that sounds great. Like, your kids get to see you do that, and maybe they join you and maybe they don't. But I really think, like, continuing to de-school around math and to take a deep breath and say, like, it's okay if I don't know this. I can just model what to do when I don't know something, and just continuing to, like, really dig into her own baggage, if she has it, around math that's making her feel a lack of confidence, I think. Because I think, again, if she was traditionally schooled, she probably had this message that, like, if you're going to be smart, you should know all this math. And I can imagine that she's a very smart, supportive parent who doesn't know every math fact, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, one of the things you said reminded me of that really funny meme that's just is always making the rounds of, like, the teacher telling the students that they had to memorize all this because they're not always going to have a calculator in their pocket.
Oh, I know. That cracks me up.
And now, of course, we all always have a calculator in our pockets. So my answer is role modeling. Mama, if you have a need and desire to learn something, breathe, set aside that math anxiety, and role model how to learn. So you could do some Khan Academy for geometry.
Oh my gosh, I had that handwritten on my paper right in front of me. That's awesome.
Watch some YouTube videos on the narrow topic. Read some tutorials online. Check out some books from the library. Connect with a mentor. That's one of our favorite ones that you can ask and that can hands-on give you some guidance. But this right here is the most valuable thing that you can teach your children, which is just how to learn. If you can role model that open-minded willingness to lean into a lack of understanding and grow through it, your kids will have everything they need.
Absolutely. And I just love that. And I would say too, to Noelle, like, there's not enough information in the question to know if she was visibly frustrated with her, not with her kids, but with the situation in front of her kids when this was happening. And I would also say, like, if she was, that's okay too. Like, be gentle with yourself and know that sometimes people get frustrated. And if your kids saw you get a little frustrated and then plug ahead and figure out how to get help, that is okay too.
So when you start to feel frustration at some gap in your understanding, that frustration so if you have baggage, that frustration turns in, like, shame stands up and shame takes over, and shame tells you you are bad at math. You can't do this. That's you just spin right into your narrative, like of all of that math anxiety that you had. But one thing that I sometimes tell parents when I'm doing coaching with them to help them get out of that cycle is I ask them, what would you say if it was your child? So if your child was working on this project and they were getting frustrated because they couldn't figure it out, would you tell them, you're just bad at math, you're never going to figure out how to do this, so you may as well quit? Like, is that what you would say? And I'm not against quitting, for the record, but I'm 100% sure that's not what you would say to them. So what would you say to your child?
I love that question.
If your child was getting frustrated trying to work through a project, I assume you would help them, like, breathe and lower like the reactivity, because you can't access any knowledge or any new ideas or any creativity if the cave woman or caveman brain has taken over, if your amygdala has hijacked your prefrontal cortex. So first get back in the driver's seat. Maybe that means taking a break. Maybe that means going for a walk. Maybe that means getting a really big hug. Maybe that means breathing, whatever it is. And then you can start to get creative, and you can get creative with somebody in like brainstorming. So I'm noticing that I'm having this gap in understanding, and I really am feeling driven to work through this project. So how can I fill in that gap? What are some ideas I can come up with? What can I look up? What can I check out? Who can I connect with? That engaging in that process, and especially for your kids to see, is just so valuable. So basically, treat yourself how you would treat your kid.
I love that so much. Yeah. And it is so that is so much more valuable than any of the actual math facts that she's perceiving a gap for herself in, right?
Exactly.
It's so much more valuable to model that process of learning for our kids, I think.
Yes. Oh, yes. And for the record, sewing is on my list. I don't even know how to sew on a button.
Me too.
It is. So I have these friends. There's someone I follow on Instagram, So Liberated. She's fabulous, and she is a sage
I follow
parent.
her too.
Yes, so she is a sage parent, and I'm trying to convince her to come on this podcast, actually. So if she's listening, this is added pressure. Because she's a homeschooling mama.
Yes.
And then I have some really awesome friends like Holly and Christina they just sew these incredible clothes and make these incredible things. And I'm feeling so like inspired, and also recognizing that I have a really long gap like to get to that point. And so I'm just trying to be gentle with myself and patient with myself, and like be open to opportunities and small steps I could take to eventually get to where I want to be. And my kids like hear me, talk through that and evaluate if I want to do something, or they hear me complimenting people on those skills. And I just think that just that experience of being open and leaning into the things you don't understand, and for your kids to know that that's where the growth happens. Like that's the most powerful part.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's so, my husband and I always say that, sometimes we're not even really sure what we did with our time before we had kids, besides really took it for granted, because I don't know, like having these kids for us, it just like gave us this renewed sense of like time is finite, and we really get to choose how we spend our time. And now my husband and I are always like, we both have a list like a mile long of things we're excited about learning. And we know we're not going to get to them all, maybe ever. And we won't get to a lot of them right away. But just like feeling excited about all of these potential things that we could learn about and learn how to do, and having our kids like hear us talk about those things is so much fun. And like, if my kids can just have that from the time that they are little all the way through, instead of basically like have to get it back after it was all squashed out of them by school, I will be so happy.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh, I'm loving this conversation. Okay. A day in the life. Yeah. Describe your favorite day this week and share with us why you loved it.
Okay. So I think my favorite day was almost a week ago. I think it was maybe last Monday. And it was the day that I mentioned our 16-year-old friend came to visit. So she flew in to Boston from Virginia. And my kids were just so excited to see her, because now it's been like 4 summers that she's been coming to visit. So she got here, and then later that day we went to the beach, and we went in the afternoon and had like it was just like a perfect moody New England beach day, which is like my favorite. Like the air was cold, but the water was actually warm enough that it didn't hurt, which is kind of rare up here. But that was really fun. So we all went, my husband and our friend and my mother-in-law came, and sometimes the beach trips, everybody loves it. Other times people aren't feeling it. But that day for my middle son, Ezra, like it just like watching him play in the ocean, he was like one with the water. He was just so in it, and it was so much fun to watch him. And then the other two kids were just kind of running back and forth between the ocean and their grandma and grabbing pretzels and having fun. My husband and the big kids like ran as far as they possibly could down the beach just because they wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, our friend, our 16-year-old friend, and me and my toddler kind of followed them, but slowly. Well, he jumped on rocks and collected rocks, and she and I caught up on life. And then after that, we went and checked out this awesome new food truck park in the same town that the beach was in, that I've been wanting to try all summer. So that was super fun. It was just great food, great music. They had like a whole chalkboard area with hula hoops for the kids, and someone was making balloon creations, and they had like all these different food trucks so everyone could eat what they wanted to eat. It was so fun.
That sounds like straight out of a New England novel.
I know, it really was. And of course, one of them was like all lobster and lobster rolls, but it was it was awesome. It's new this summer, and I've just been wanting to check it out all summer. They're open every night, and like different food trucks sign up to come every night. It's the coolest place.
That
awesome.
sounds dreamy.
Yes, it was really lovely. And then that night we got home, and after the toddler was asleep, I went and I found my 8-year-old on the couch, and he was watching YouTube. And I have to admit that I still sometimes have a gut reaction to hearing them watching YouTube, especially when it's like a YouTube with like, I don't know, maybe they're watching somebody else play video games and the people who are playing are like screaming really loud. And that's like something that I'm working really hard on. Thus, I sat down with him, and he was watching a video of people playing his favorite game right now, Fortnite. So all these gamers were like yelling in excitement, but it was actually hilarious because it was a video showing like first what they call noobs, like newbies at a game, and then pros, and both of these groups of people were like reacting to their own gameplay, and it was just so funny. And my son and I were just cracking up together, and it was just like such an awesome way to end the day. And then the 6-year-old came over and like, saw us laughing, and so we had to go back to the beginning and watch it with him. But just for like something that I'm still working on not having like a negative judgment of, it was really cool to like just sit down with him and try to keep an open mind and actually just have a great time and just like a great connection with him. So that was my favorite day this week.
Wow, you just hit like so many wonderful things in one day.
They're not all like that, but that one was really great.
That is awesome. So let's take a deep dive. If you want the show notes sent right to your inbox, just subscribe over on sageparenting.com and you won't miss out on all the Sage family goodness like these. So what are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic?
Yeah, so I think the 2 articles that I read by Peter Gray are probably 2 of my favorites. So I sent you those links.
Yes, they will be linked in the show notes.
Yeah, I just think it's hearing, just because based on everything that I've heard from him and read about him, like I just really trust a lot of his approach. And but hearing all of the little anecdotes from families, like if you're looking for even more ideas about how math actually is a natural part of life and how self-directed kids learn math, go read that article. I think it's called Kids Learn Math Easily When They Control Their Own Learning. And go to the end and just read all these stories about how kids have learned math. It's just so inspiring, and I think it will really kind of calm the fears if you're having any fears.
And his book, Free to Learn, too.
Yes, his book, Free to Learn, is one of our favorites.
Mine too.
That's a great one. And then, I mean, of course, again, when it comes to math, I think so much of it, again, is more about deschooling. So I think anything you can get your hands on about deschooling and, John Holt's books, just to learn more about how children really learn. I find like when the fear creeps in, if we can strip it back to reminding ourselves like why we're choosing this path and what we really truly believe about how children learn, it can really help to recenter us again. So those are my those are my main suggestions.
Is How Children Learn your favorite one from John Holt?
Probably. I haven't really thought about what my favorite one is, but what's your favorite one?
I love all things John Holt and like every word that he says, and I've read I think almost everything he's written, like articles and whatnot. There's not been one book though that I'm like, wow, this book like is amazing and really resonates, and I want every person to read it. If that makes sense, it's kind of like
no, that does make sense.
Bits and pieces of all the things that he says, but I haven't like had an experience reading any one book like I did when I read like Free to Learn, or I read Homegrown, or when I read, like my favorites.
Yeah, I still haven't read Homegrown. That's on my list.
Oh my goodness. I would like you to bump that up to the top of the list.
Okay.
It's
writing it down now.
It's very different from all these other books that we're talking about because it's not written with like the researcher mind. It's really like he's a writer, and so the writing is like an experience. It's like eating very rich healthy food. That's what it feels like to my brain.
Yeah, I know, that's so fun, and I like taking it in different forms because I like the research, and that helps me feel sometimes better about making a choice that's so countercultural, but I also really like the beautiful stories and things that can be a little bit more engaging in that way. So
exactly. And then Pamela Rickia's unschooling book too.
Yes, her stuff. Yeah, Pamela Rickia. I mean, she has a bunch of ebooks that she offers people who are kind of new to the unschooling, and just ton of stuff on her website even about deschooling, and her podcast. So that's a good place too if you're kind of getting caught up with the math. Just going back to the deschooling idea, I think, can be really helpful.
The Unschooling Journey, a field guide. Okay, I looked it up. That's
there
famous.
We go.
I cheated. I looked up the answer. In school, I would be a cheater.
Oh my gosh, you're such a cheater.
And then your podcast, of course, needs to be on the list. One Free Family.
Thank you.
Everybody should go check that out.
Yes.
And give that a listen. I also follow you on Instagram. I don't know if that's like public for the whole world, but I certainly enjoy following you.
That One Free Family pages. I think I said to you, I'm still wading through like where I fall with sharing my kids' stories and faces. And I mean, your advice was awesome, which was just like talk to them about it and see if they feel okay with you sharing. But One Free Family on Instagram is public. Yeah.
Okay. I will link to that as well, just because I enjoy following it so much. One Free Family.
Thank you so much.
On Instagram. Thank you so much for coming and talk with me today. I had so many people wanting an episode on math, actually, after the episode about reading came out, and I was just like waiting for just the right person, and then all the stars aligned, and I get to have you here, and it was everything I'd hoped it would be, so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. I'm so glad that I found you. I'm really just so inspired by you and all the work that you do, and just it's fun to kind of, like you said, it's fun to watch your family's life and what you guys get up to all the way across the country. So
thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.